it's not too clear what it can do. And you mentioned cases where the states could not resist the ID, I would say nullification, the Marriage Act, and all the rest of it. This goes on because it doesn't have the authority to enforce it.
Or doesn't have the ability, or doesn't want to spend the money. Right, the central government doesn't. Either doesn't have the ability
Well,
or
it has all that you mentioned, the Army and all the rest of it, but it doesn't have the moral authority to enforce those things.
Or practically speaking, it just doesn't have the ability. They have to hire more people.
Okay, yeah, whatever.
It's too costly.
Well, if it did hire more people, I'm not sure if it could do it.
Could pay them.
I'm not sure if it could do it. In other words, there's a point at which the federal agents will not come in because they're afraid of the people who do it. Not that they'll resist or arrest them, because it's
Like what eventually happened in the Soviet Union.
Representative Quinn.
Yes, sir. I have the distinction of being, I think, the only non-lawyer on the subcommittee. So I'm having to have a law professor and different people, obviously much more intelligent than I am, argue about whether nullification is possible or not. And of course, one of my, one of the greater South Carolinians ever argued for principle of nullification, and Calhoun and Jefferson also argued for it. So it's just a complex question to me, and I think it goes back to there was a fellow that wrote a piece on this. I think his name was Clyde Wilson, who was even talked about the Confederate States of America and how they argued about whether to form a Supreme Court in the Confederacy. And so these are complex issues and have a lot of nuanceical points to them. But and I'm not going to ask you to comment on the bill, but that's before us, and I'm, as somebody maybe a little more open-minded about this principle, I look at the bill and I've been struggling on how it would be implemented. And so, that we keep giving the instance of arresting a federal judge, and I know lawyers think that's a scary thing. Sometimes federal judges maybe should be arrested. But the greater issue, though, is I looked at the bill, and it basically says that anybody, whether working for a private corporation or the federal government, who tries to implement to enforce or go by the Affordable Care Act is committed a felony and should go to jail and pay a fine. And so I just thought I'd go through what would be the practical application of that. And so, for example, I think about really the everyday citizen, what's right or wrong. You got somebody that works for Blue Cross Blue Shield or an insurance company, and they decide, well, we're not going to give this child who's 26 years old a family coverage, that's one of the things that ObamaCare does. It says if you're a child and you're on a policy, you can keep that child up till age 26. Or there are other things about covering somebody with pre-existing conditions, for example. So if an employee at Blue Cross says, well, South Carolina has nullified it and I'm not going to follow it, and then that insurance person is faced with potentially being in violation and maybe being sued, and they say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and give you the coverage. They'd be in violation of Mr. Chumley's bill. And is that a right thing to do, to say, okay, to an insurance person who's just giving coverage to somebody under this law? Because there are a lot of bad things about Obamacare, and it's an abomination as far as I'm concerned. But is that a right thing to do, to maybe place somebody in jail that's just an everyday citizen that's working for an insurance company that's just implementing things that maybe some people in this room agree with, the mandate to give coverage for pre-existing conditions? Is that right? Is that right to do that?
well, I better not comment because
You see, that's what we're struggling with.
Loaded question.
the question. Jefferson said in the case of federal intrusion into the reserved rights of the state must decide the level of the infraction and the means of redress. And the question is has the infraction arisen to the level of arresting federal prison? Can you not imagine an obnoxious intrusion which would rise to that level? Is there nothing the federal government could do to a political society, an American state, that would not require the protection of its officials in just the capacity you mentioned?
Well, in fact, I agree with you on that point. I guess I'm worried about the margins.
If it is possible to entertain that within our federal system, not the United States system, some think the Constitution is. But in our federal system, then the question is this a prudent thing to do? First, does it rise to the level of that sort of remedy? And secondly, is it prudent remedy? And I just can't answer those questions, but that's what you have to think about. So I would not put it out of bounds to entertain that thought, but again, that is really a political question as to what is prudent.
Well, and I guess what I struggle with, because I think that's, it's not the big things, it's the marginal things that worry me about doing it. But I do think there are cases where we should, to be honest with you. But I wonder if maybe in the margins of this bill, we're doing some things we shouldn't. And I'd love to hear your opinion on that once you have the opportunity to read the bill.
Representative Pope, then Representative McLeod, and then Representative Smith.
Professor, I knew we're going to take more time than it took for you to ride up here if we keep getting your questions. But I tried to do a lot of reading when this first came up to understand it, because I've told my friends I take seriously my constitutional oath and making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be. The flip side is, I think if you took a poll, I don't even have to take it out there, if you took it up here, we've got as a caucus, we're going to do everything we can to not implement Obamacare. So what we're trying to probe is the bounds of what we can do based on our oath. One of the things when I was reading nullification and interposition, and sometimes they're used together. I think John C. Calhoun said they were the same, but sometimes they're not. If I understood, you kind of start on this, but interposition is really, we do the things like we're doing today, where we say that we as a state believe this is unconstitutional. And part of what we're doing is sending up a flare or a flag to our fellow states in this compact to say we see a problem, and we hope that they in turn see that. Okay, and that's kind of the beginning of what I kind of see sometimes as a distinction between interposition. You could argue that the marijuana laws on the other side of the country, that's their first flare, that they think marijuana is not an issue that the feds do think, and other states may join on. Is that the kind, again, knowing you hadn't seen the bill, but those type things are the mechanics that we have to do, using Representative Delaney's bill, if there's things that you touched on.
I think that's what he was describing, and that's what Madison talked about, because he talked about interposition in the Virginia resolution.
Absolutely.
Interposition. And Jefferson used the term nullification.
Right.
But it has to rise to a certain level for nullification.
Right.
And nullification is that you will not enforce it, and presumably you would use
Forced to
you would use state laws to do what you have to do. But that's pretty serious, obviously.
Right.
Especially, and you're right, more so now than it was when Jefferson was around. But interposition, it is a case of what I'm talking about. It is a political society. It denies this notion of the Constitution of the United States. It recognizes that it's a compact and political society. A political society steps forward to protect its citizens in whatever way it can prudently and constitutionally do to protect them. And that would be interposition.
And I think I took notes when you were speaking. Numerous times you said the states.